Welcome to the Advancing Surgical Care podcast, brought to you by ASCA, the Ambulatory Surgery Center Association. ASCA represents the interests of outpatient surgery centers of every specialty and provides advocacy and resources to assist them in providing safe, high-quality, cost-effective patient care. As with all of ASCA's communications, please check to make sure you are listening to or viewing our most up-to-date podcasts and announcements.
Hello and welcome to the Advancing Surgical Care podcast. My name is Bill Prentice. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Ambulatory Surgery Center Association, or ASCA, and the host of this episode. We're recording this episode and several of these podcasts at ASCA's 2024 Annual Conference and Expo in Orlando, Florida. And my guest today is Will Evans, who will be giving a presentation at the conference entitled Unleash the Power of Data to Transform Your ASC. I'm eager to talk with him about some of his recommendations. Will is with HST Pathways of Nashville, Tennessee, a leading provider of software solutions that help ASCs stay organized, efficient, compliant, and profitable. Will is responsible for data and science insights and for generating actionable information from HST's data and building data products to support the operational and clinical performance of surgery centers. Will has over 10 years of experience in leading revenue operations, software as a service or SaaS companies, and holds both a BA and MA in economics. Will, welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Happy to be here.
So, Will, it's clear you're passionate about data and its potential for improving the clinical and operational performance of ASCs, and your presentation included some very impressive analytics about how ASCs can capture and analyze and use their data to make significant improvements. I also appreciate that you recognize that not all surgery centers have the resources and capability to fully automate all of their operations. So let's start with some basics and how even a relatively small standalone surgery center can start with collecting some meaningful data. What can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. You do not have to be a large ambulatory surgical center or a part of a large management company to really start taking advantage of the data that you already have going through your systems. And so what I would recommend generally is start to inventory what you have available. What are the data points that you already collect and have access to? Those are always a great starting point around understanding today, what are the aspects of your operations that you report on? From there, I would recommend inventorying the software that you have access to so that if you want to start analyzing that data, look at, do you have access to things like spreadsheet software, such as Microsoft Excel? Or maybe even BI tools, things like Tableau, Power BI, or maybe Alteryx. And from there, understand, does that software integrate with any other sources of data? So that then you can just start compiling and pulling together into one source the data points that you have.
All right, well, that's very informative. So let's say that an ASC puts some infrastructure in place to capture some KPIs, some key performance indicators on things like aging receivables or profitability by codes or compliance requirements, and maybe a few others. Can you share with our listeners how they can begin to apply some fundamental analysis to that data?
Absolutely. This is a great question. And I think it really gets at the heart of decision-making with data. A lot of times when people start on the process of data analysis, they're always tempted to jump into what is the most cutting-edge thing that I can do. And right now, that's things like artificial intelligence, deep learning. And while those things definitely have their place, that's not where I would recommend surgery centers start off with. You're always going to be surprised at what you can learn just by doing basic things like sorting, ranking, and benchmarking data points. So I'm a firm believer in the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the activities are going to drive 80% of the value. And when you just start off on your data analysis journey, you've got all of that you can explore.
So to be very practical about this, Will, for someone for whom this is a completely new topic and idea, what are the first steps they should take in terms of trying to collect some data?
Great question. In very just specific and practical terms, what I recommend is starting with just exporting data out of whatever software systems that you use as your source of truth. And really here, the idea is you want to create a report or start with something that you know and has fidelity and you trust, and export that into something like Excel, or I've even worked at companies where they didn't want to purchase Excel, so we use something like Google Sheets, which is a free spreadsheet software. And you import the data into that as a CSV. And from there, if you want to join it with other sources of data or you want to start calculating new metrics, that is the most common way that organizations start with building out a data pipeline, albeit manual, but just having those set processes really benefits you from starting on a data analysis journey.
So keep it simple to start. And then if you start simple, you're going to find some really interesting nuggets that you're going to be able to apply and use to become more efficient, to be better, and then maybe grow from there.
Absolutely. It's an incremental and iterative process where you start small, you start to learn, and from there you can build over time doing what makes sense.
Well, you mentioned benchmarking, and as I'm sure you know, ASCA has our own proprietary benchmarking program that many of our members subscribe to for the purpose of comparing their data to other surgery centers in their peer groups, whether, by state or region or, provider type. And I know you strongly believe in the concept of benchmarking for surgery centers, and you talk about that in your presentation. Do you have any particular advice or wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners regarding the whole idea of benchmarking?
Absolutely. When I found out about ASCA's benchmarking and how fortunate the ASC industry is to have something like this, I was really amazed. I've worked in other industries before where customers craved this type of data to really understand what's the art of the possible. And to me, that's where benchmarking really shines.
For one thing, it takes you out of that bubble where by yourself, and now all of a sudden you can see and learn from what others like you are doing to improve themselves that you can mirror or learn from.
Absolutely. That's a great way of summarizing it. The way that when I think about benchmarking and when you're running, whether it's a management company or a surgery center, part of it is understanding what are the levers you have to pull within that surgery center to make an impact in your operation. And when you break that down into KPIs and you can understand where you fall in the population for a benchmark, that's where you can really start to understand what are the levers you have that you can really drive center performance with. Because if you're doing benchmarking and you see that you're in the top 10% for a certain metric, that might not mean that there's a lot more for you to really get out of that. Whereas for other spots, if you're maybe more towards the middle or the lower half of the spectrum, those are probably good areas to start digging in and figuring out what are the improvements that we can make here.
That's great. So, Will, perhaps most importantly, you spent a fair amount of time in your presentation talking about how to best implement change based on that data collection and analysis, even when supported by data. So what's your best advice for using data to support operational change in a surgery center?
I completely agree. And to be honest, I love this question. It's a frequently overlooked aspect of data analysis. A lot of people think that you do the data analysis, you find an insight, and then it's obvious to everyone, hey, we should go do something like this. While there's the kind of advice out there where you can Google it and there's things of, to create organizational change, do things like identify a champion, set recurring meetings. Those are great starting points, but there's two pieces that I'll specifically highlight that I've had to learn that really are relevant to data-driven change within organizations. And me personally being a data analyst, it's a little more evident to me that when I do the data analysis and I find something new, like I get excited about it. And it's really engaging. Oh, okay, the data says this, let's go do it. But not everyone's that way, right? And so the two things that I would recommend to start with is one, anytime you're presenting a new metric or a new type of KPI, make sure that the data set and the analysis is auditable and traceable.
All right. So explain that. What does auditable and traceable mean?
So that means when you're presenting something, you don't just present the summary level metric. You need to have the supporting documentation there to show someone so that if they ask you like, hey, how did you calculate that? Or can I see that in a different way? You can show them, here's the formula I use, here's the data set. These are the filters that I used to export that data set. And if you want to go through and step through the math, we can do that.
So just the like being in the elementary school with your math, you got to show your work.
Absolutely. Show your work. It really helps build credibility when you have new people that are going through this process. They need to get a little more comfortable.
That makes perfect sense to me. So now what's the second?
The second piece, and this is one that I've had to learn the hard way, pre-socializing your results. Now, let's say you've started the process of setting up recurring data meetings within your organization, and you present a new KPI. And a lot of times, maybe not a lot of times, part of the time, that KPI might shine an unflattering light on a different part of your organization, or it shows that there's an opportunity that maybe this team needs to improve. If you show that in that meeting, and that's the first time that team's seeing that, they're probably going to feel blindsided. And so what I always recommend doing is having a meeting before that meeting, several days or if it's a week in advance, where you sit down with that team or that individual, you show them your analysis, you show them the traceable and auditable data that you've used, and you give them that opportunity to kind of internalize the results and think through, like, is this really a true and accurate representation of how we're performing? And maybe you go through a handful of additional cycles with them and you give them the opportunity to get some different variations on those metrics. But really what you want to do is you want to get aligned so that then when you do go show the metric in the public meeting, you allow that person to come prepared and they're able to show up and they say, hey, we agree this is an area of opportunity, and here's the ideas that we have for how we can improve upon what we're doing.
Well, the way I would crystallize what you just said there, and I think it is really an important element so that the data is received the way you want it to, is I think about it as my position as a CEO is if an employee is going to bring a problem to me, I want it accompanied by the solution. How are we fixing it? And so I think to the extent that you do that as the pre-work before that public presentation, I think you're right. It's going to be received better, and I think people are going to be prepared to want to act on it in the right way to get to the right result.
Absolutely. Yeah, you really turn what can be a challenging conversation into a circumstance where you're allowing the other person to look good, right?
You're giving them an opportunity to succeed and to be the hero because they're going to fix something that has, for whatever reason, whether their fault or someone else's, has not been as good as it could have been.
Totally agree.
Well, Lil, I want to thank you for your participation here at ASCA 2024 and for taking the time to talk with me today. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy and benefit from this discussion, as will your audience at your session today. And I really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill.
Before concluding, I would like to acknowledge our podcast sponsor, AmSurge, a leading ASC management company with more than 250 ASC partners in 34 states. To learn more about them, visit amsurge.com.